The focus of this session is to hear from a range of staff, from academics to professional services staffs, and also from a wide range of different hierarchical levels, to reflect on how disability has impacted their careers, tips that they would give to others, and also changes that they would like to see the university and their colleagues make in order to become more accessible to all members of the community. So I'm going to hand over at this point to panel members to introduce themselves. And the first person I'd like to introduce is Emma Partlow. So Emma, would you like to say just a little bit about yourself?
Hello, thank you for the introduction, Richard. So my name's Emma Partlow. I am a disabled person. I've got 2 long-term impairments that are very much invisible to the untrained eye. If you're perhaps a medical consultant or a physiotherapist, you may pick up that my body doesn't work in a normative way. Alongside this, I'm a disabled researcher. I'm currently researching into the disabled experiences of work, very much focused on how policies and equalities legislation are being utilised and enacted upon within the workplace. I'm in the middle of field work at the moment. The findings are really interesting, what's coming out. Hopefully I can talk a little bit more about this later. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Our next panellist is Pete Collins. So Pete, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Richard. So yeah, I'm Pete Collins. I'm the Student Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Officer. I've been at the university since February. Prior to this, I worked as a TV runner, researcher and assistant producer, as well as visitor experience consultant in the cultural sector. And I've also worked in autism awareness and more temp jobs than I can count. I've been unemployed once or twice, and none of this has happened in the order I was expecting. So my career has been completely non-linear, and I'll get into this a bit more later, but the reasons I discovered for that was because I'm autistic, and I was diagnosed a few years ago at the age of 34.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Next up is Dave Cotton. Dave, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Richard. Yeah, I'm David Cotton. My day job is I'm the IT manager for the IT manager for research and education in the College of Social Science, and I chair the Enabling Staff Network on a voluntary basis. I have 2 disabilities. The main one is that I'm actually a registered blind person. I was registered blind in 2006, having very gradual sight loss over many years. So slow that you didn't actually get noticed until I was 13. I first came to the university in the late 70s as, I suppose it would be, a client of the education department's visual impairment unit and then their educational psychology unit. So they helped me a lot of the way through through schooling and all the rest of it in the background. I've worked for the university for 30 years now, joined here in 1989, worked mostly in the social sciences areas, public policy initially, then business school, then where I'm now in Muirhead Tower working for the college. As I say, I co-chair the Enabling Staff Network, and the main aim of that network is to work with the university to fix a lot of the disability issues that we have on site, but I'll come on to that later on when I'm talking.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Next up is Sonali Shah. Sonali, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Panellists. I'm a research fellow in the School of Nursing at Birmingham. I've been a research fellow for about 14 years in different universities, Leeds, Glasgow, Nottingham, since my PhD in 2002. Currently, my work is around experiences of healthcare for women with cerebral palsy. I have cerebral palsy myself, which impacts me in different ways. but also I'm disabled by social barriers imposed on my impairment. As you can see on the slide, I've developed quite I've written 4 books and 14 journal articles. I also teach disability at master's and undergraduate level. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sonali. And then last but not least, Mark Sterling. Mark, would you like to say a bit about yourself?
Thanks, Richard. Mark Sterling, Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor of Staffing and also Beale Professor of Civil Engineering. And I've been frantically trying to work out how long I've been at the university when other colleagues have spoken, and I've come to the conclusion it's about 22 years. So started off as a research fellow and continued to my current position, and I currently live with epilepsy. Thank you.
So thank you to all the panel for those introductions. I'm going to kick off with a few pre-prepared questions, but can I just reiterate Joe's point that we welcome questions from the audience. Please put them on the Q&A, and I will try and get through as many questions as possible before we end a little bit before 2 o'clock today. So my first question, and this is to all of the panelists, is a very straightforward question. If you could tell us a little bit about how disability has impacted on your career. And Pete, would you like to take that question first?
Sure, thanks, Richard. Okay, so I just want to say right off the bat that I love autism. I love being autistic, and in many ways it's been a real gift. That's not to say that being autistic hasn't come with some significant challenges. The way these manifest is different for everyone, but in my case, because of the way my brain's wired, on a day-to-day basis, I'll struggle with things like multitasking, switching quickly from one task to another, dealing with uncertainty, memory recall. So, for example, unless instructions are written down, preferably in a kind of logical order, and even better if it comes with visual instructions, because I respond really well to diagrams, I'll forget within seconds. Sometimes as well, if I'm put on the spot to answer a question, my mind will go completely blank. So I'll find myself in a situation where I'm just having to try and fluff my way out of the situation. In some kind of chaotic environments, often I literally can't hear what people are saying to me because I can't process the sound. And my natural ways of interacting socially are pretty different to a lot of non-autistic people. So things like small talk are a living hell for me. So it's like you say something to fill the time, and then I say something to fill the time. It's like, okay, where are we going with this? So yeah. And the other thing is extreme fatigue, which I can't emphasize enough. My manager Sammy will tell you how many coffees it takes for me to get through a day. So as a result of these processing differences, a lot of us on the autistic spectrum learn at a quite young age that our way of being in the world is unacceptable to teachers, to classmates, managers and colleagues who find us weird, difficult, inconvenient, and they can be quite critical of us based on quite a subjective understanding of what is appropriate and normal. And over time, those kind of repeated messages and exclusions can become internalized to a point where some quite significant mental health challenges can occur as a result of low self-worth. So my biggest problem is anxiety, which can be completely debilitating. So when you apply those difficulties in a career context, I found that many environments, and by environments I mean organizational cultures and certain colleagues within that culture, can be completely disabling. So one month I find myself in quite a senior position, quite a well-paid job, And the next month, after a minor breakdown, I'll find myself working a temporary admin job, worrying about paying my bills and trying to get my my medication increased. So it's been quite a bumpy ride. Largely, I would say, because of a lack of understanding in the workplace and wider society, and a lack of appropriate adaptations and services. That's fueled my passion for equality and diversity and inclusion, why I feel incredibly lucky to be doing the job I'm doing now with such a great team, because there are so many people like the rest of us who need the barriers to be broken down. That's what we're working on doing with events like this. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Pete. Can I pass the same question to Sonali? Sonali, you've written a blog about this, which Joe has shared the web address for on our chat, if anybody is interested in looking at that. Tell us a little bit about your career experiences, Sonali.
Oh, you're on mute, Sonali.
Sorry. Okay, so my disability has impacted my career in a positive and not so positive way. In terms of, I guess I only did my PhD because of my experiences as a disabled person myself. And obviously, all my subsequent research has been around disability and social and barriers and inclusion. So I guess that has positive. Without me being disabled, I probably wouldn't be an academic. But in a negative way, although I have done all the required things, publish, teach, get research, money, etc., and my career has always had gaps. I've worked for 4 universities on fellowships, but I've always lost my job at the end of my contract. So I guess it's all about attitudes and physical and social barriers. I guess having a speech impairment, as you can tell, doesn't favor positively in the academic world of, you get associated with having a learning disability, which obviously I haven't got. So yeah, as Pete says, it's a very bumpy ride in a different way for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Sonali. I'm going to ask the same question now to Mark. Mark, how has disability impacted your career?
The short answer is, Richard, I have absolutely no idea. The reason I have no idea is I wasn't aware that I had epilepsy until almost at the start of my career. And at the start of my career, I look back now, I think I was incredibly sharp, and whether that's just arrogant or looking back through rose-tinted spectacles, I have no idea. And then I had epilepsy, or I was aware I had it, and it really knocked me for six. It knocked me for six in the sense of the medication I took, I found was slowed my cognitive ability and induced a lot of fatigue. I was naturally a confident person, and all of a sudden I didn't want to travel. And when all my colleagues were traveling around the country, traveling around the world, I suddenly found that actually I didn't want to do that. And how I've got over that is I've worked hard and I've worked longer, which actually isn't the most sensible thing to do when you've got epilepsy, because you get more tired. And the more tired you get, that increases, for me, the risk of having a seizure, which then takes you around. But I have come to terms with it, and like Pete says, it has been a gift, because what I'm now able to do is I'm able to understand some of the challenges, not all of the challenges that colleagues have. And I honestly think if I didn't have it, I probably wouldn't be in this position now, because my career would have gone in a different direction. So yeah, I think it's been a gift in some sense. And you asked me, if you have asked me sort of 10 years ago what I thought would have been a gift, definitely not, because it annoys me that I can't drive a car, and that was one of the things I really loved. But I honestly don't know, Richard. I think I'd have a different job now if I hadn't discovered I had epilepsy about 15, 18 years ago.
Thanks, Mark. Bit of a pattern emerging here. Dave, how has disability impacted on your career?
I think in a lot of respects, it's a bit like Mark in some circumstances, in that I always knew I was visually impaired, but I didn't really take that into account, because I think internally you believe, I mean, I was 13 when I was told I was going to go blind. Up until then, my sight was quite reasonable. I was cycling up until 2006. It was actually cycling to work one morning when I didn't see a cyclist coming the other way on the canal towpath, that I thought, no, things have got a lot worse. So I ended up at the hospital, and obviously that story is now told. Was registered blind there and then. I think I've been very lucky in a lot of respects with the university, in that the areas of work that I've been involved in, I've been able to adjust the working environment to suit me. Working for, originally I started off here as a telephonist, and very soon moved into IT, into computing. And I mean, computing in 1989 was very, very basic within the departments. And the assistive technology wasn't available then, but it is now. And the acceleration that technology has moved forward means that I can work around a lot of the problems. Smartphones, taking photographs of signs if I can't see them, take a photograph of it, you can see it on the screen. So there's a lot of workarounds with that. I think I've been quite lucky with a lot of the management, well, with all the management, that they've always understood the issues that I've been having, and we've worked around, worked to actually work around those problems. Use of access to work, provided a lot of equipment, and assessments and things like that. So in those respects, it was actually been quite good. One of the major problems I have is navigation in non-familiar areas. So my role now is mostly I'm based in Muirhead Town, but I do have to travel to meetings around campus and things like that. And generally I'm okay in buildings. I know buildings I've not gone into before, I'll have to go and spend an extra bit of time the day before a meeting, when we used to have physical meetings, to find the room. And sometimes it's quite difficult, because there's a lot of poor signage around the university, which is not easily accessible for visually impaired. So I think, and sort of the other thing I'd like to say is that I think it's also, I don't think, if you said to me in 1989, I'd be sat here having this conversation in front of colleagues, I wouldn't have believed that I would actually be sat here doing this. The dyslexia side is very similar issues to Peter, as in that my copy typing isn't very good, because I can't remember what I've read. Add to that the visual impairment, and you've got a double sort of problem. I mean, the way around that now is obviously you can get, I have screen readers that read the text, and I can electronically copy text these days, and so that the technology moving on has really changed all that. And I think for me, using all my experiences that I've had, and other family members have also on the autistic spectrum as well. So and taking their experiences, it really enabled me to steer a lot of this through into the enabling staff network to try and get some other things changed on site. So I think for me personally, if I hadn't had this disability or disabilities, I don't think I would be doing what I would be doing now. And I quite like what I'm doing now. So, you know, I don't think it would, my personal opinion, can't look back and change things. I'm quite happy. So yeah, I think it's had a positive impact.
I'm really struck by what a mixture of positive and negative experience people have had. Emma, over to you. What's your experience?
Yeah, so very much in the same way. I can start by saying this was never my plan. I fell into academia, really. I started doing a sociology A level and feeling this deep sense of frustration that there were no disabled experiences included in the things I was reading, which led me to go on and do a degree and then a master's and then now the PhD. I really wanted to know where the voices, where the experiences were of disabled people, people like myself, family members, which is what I'm still trying to do today, find out where those narratives are within academia. I find myself today in this really interesting place as both a disabled person and a disabled researcher. I've come up with a couple of issues kind of along the time of doing research over the last few years. One particular incident, I'd done a fantastic focus group, really good engagement, lots of discussion, looking at disabled experiences of the Equality Act. And at the time, I never used to disclose my own disability, hadn't given it very, very much thought, but being invisibly disabled, a couple of participants had assumed that I was able-bodied, non-disabled. So at the end of this focus group, the question was put back onto me. An individual said, so from an able-bodied perspective, what do you think of all this? And that was really the turning point for me as a point of reflection. So from that point now, I always disclose that I've got a disability before my research conversations. And the way in which people relate to me now is far better. But there's also a tension there that as a researcher, I don't want them to assume that we've got the same experiences. This is really key. You know, disabled people aren't a homogenous group. We've all got very different experiences. So I'm now carefully trying to tread this line of saying, okay, I am disabled. We possibly have the same shared experiences, but actually our lives may be very different. So in terms of how it's impacted my career, I find myself straddling this place between a disabled person and a researcher and trying to navigate and negotiate those power relations and dynamics within research. Hopefully I'll go on and have an academic career. That is the long-term goal. But it's kind of a see what happens. I'm very aware of competitive nature. Whether disability will impact that and come into it, only time will tell. But as it stands, I'm juggling these dynamics.
Thank you, Emma. Moving on, of course, Sonali and Emma, what marks both of you out is that you are also researchers of disability. And so I wanted to throw the question specifically to you of what you think the impact of disabilities are on careers more broadly, and you know, perhaps particularly in academia, but also we could think about this more broadly. Sonali, would you like to address that question first? And can I also say, somebody has asked if your book, Young Disabled People, is available in the library. I have to say I don't know, but if it is, maybe you can say so, and if it isn't, maybe we can order a copy.
I'm not sure actually if it's at Birmingham. It's definitely at the other universities I've worked for, but I'm not sure about Birmingham. I could ask. So yeah, in terms of my academic career, as I said before, it's enabled me to do the research I am passionate about disabled people with a life course and their access to work, health, family life, etc. In terms of my own trajectory as an academic, I believe if I was non-disabled, I would be a professor. But like a lot of my colleagues, when I was a postdoc and they were postdocs, they're now quite high up and they've got professors, very senior roles, yet they've got the same publications as me, same grants, or not as much income. So yeah, I think in that regard, it's definitely negative. Like Emma says, it's given me an insider perspective when I do my research, field work. I like to do it myself. I manage projects, but I also do my own field work because being a disabled woman, researching disabled women kind of gives you a richer data than you might get with a non-disabled woman or man interviewing the same participants. So yes, again, a two-way view. Yeah.
Thank you, Sonali. Emma, how about from you? What does your research show about the impact of disability on careers?
So it's very early days, kind of the theorising that I'm doing, but what I am finding is that careers are important to disabled people. And I think that is news to a lot of people, kind of the general public, and a lot of disabled people themselves. When I've presented my work at conferences in various different spaces, I've often had people say to me, but why are you doing this work? You know, work is bad, you're wasting your time, work is bad. Why are we trying to find out about the disabled experiences of work? And in many ways, work is bad, and we do all need to rally and look at the ways in which work is organised. But we need the disabled experiences of work in order to be able to do that. So the future of work and all of these initiatives surrounding the workplace, worker wellbeing, we really need to understand how disabled people are experiencing work and policies, and bring that forward to this wider fight. So career is important to people, and they want to work, they want to do well at work, but very little is known about this kind of day-to-day living and experiencing of work. So I'm hoping as more data is collected, as the analysis rolls on, some theorising will come out, and we'll know a little bit more, which will add to this wider debate around work. But the key thing and a very early finding is that careers and work are important to disabled people. And we need to support that and make sure that organisations know this and are supportive and have got communication open in order to support people's career goals and aspirations.
So that's actually a really good seg into my next question, which is about what organisations can do, and in particular what our university can do to support disabled people, to make the university more accessible. Dave, I wonder if I can ask you first what you feel the university has done over recent years, and also what we could do more from your position as chair of the Enabling Access Network.
Okay, I mean, sort of recent years, I'm going to put a 14-year time frame in because that's the point I started chairing the Enabling Staff Network. And since then, and slightly before, we've had a lot of engagement with estates management on the building projects to try and get buildings to be at a more accessible level. I mean, as an example, Bramall building, it wasn't until Bramall was built that you actually had level access into Aston Webb building from Chancellor's Court. Before then, the entrance was at the Frankland end. So it's projects like that that have actually helped the accessibility of campus. A couple of the other buildings we did assessments on originally, which was the Munro Sports Centre and the old library, and we now have a new sports centre and a new library, which we're also involved on those projects, which have vastly improve the accessibility of those areas, because the original buildings were just not accessible in a lot of respects, despite everybody's hard work to try and make them accessible. It just wasn't going to happen. I think we've done a lot more recently with engagement with senior management through Joe. ESN reports to Joe on the equality matters, and we identified there was a hole on the operational reporting, i.e. physical problems that needed to be fixed. So Mark Sterling now has set up a disability accessibility group, which is myself, all of the other co-chairs on, Hilary Tansley from the States and Philippa Hawkins. So together we talk about all sorts of problems or disability issues, and try and work to resolving those. So there's a lot of movement in that sort of area. I think COS has done an awful lot of work with their wellbeing groups, which, to be quite honest, I've borrowed some of those ideas and pushed them across the rest of the university where I can, and where people have taken it on board. Particularly the one that's most recently is the mental health first aid support that's been put in place for staff in COS, and that has been taken up now in certainly IT services taken up with their management, and it's also in other areas of the university where other staff have been trained. So there's people locally that can help the colleagues who might be struggling at that particular time. So I think if I was to say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, that those sort of we hadn't got those sort of resources on site, so there's a massive step forward there. The projects that we have been involved with, a lot of the big ones that I've listed, there's Bramall, the Lapworth refurbishment. We had a look at the accessibility of the old areas of Lapworth and gave recommendations for what it should look like in the new one. The Franklin building, Chamberlain refurbishment, the CTL building, we were involved with that as well. So I think there's my personal view is if you look at a problem from a disabled person's eyes, you get quite a good, they can identify the problems that we might think, oh, we might have a job getting a wheelchair through that area, and actually it's not really in our mind because we can always get out of that wheelchair if we're not using one daily. Whereas what we try and do with ESN is we'll get somebody who is in that position to use it, like the printers that went onto campus a few years ago, the managed printing system. We were involved in that in respect to whether a wheelchair user could actually use the copier units. Well, they can't, so it was mitigated by they can apply for a printer separately from that system, or it's on that system, but there's one will be provided, etc. Originally, they weren't suitable for visually impaired, so I did quite a bit of work, and Mike Ridley did a lot of work with the providers to actually make the touchpad work like an iPad, so they will actually zoom, which makes it a little bit easier for visually impaired. So there's a lot of work in those sort of areas that's happening. I think there's a significant investment going to happen over the accessibility of our websites and teaching materials because of the law change that's happened recently. So the university is going ahead with quite a reasonable sized task force to sort out a lot of those. ESN have always done assessments on sort of informal assessments on websites. We can't do a lot with respect to time, but we do give initial ideas of where things are going to be problematic. Core was one. The first time I looked at Core, it wasn't really accessible. Now it's not as bad. There are areas which will obviously get improved, but it's things like that we've been involved with. So yes, the university has, I think, in recent years strived forward with that, but it still has quite a long way to go, in my opinion.
Thanks, Dave. I mean, quite a positive view there, and thanks also for the shout out for our college's mental health first aid scheme, where if anybody wants to know more about that, I'm happy to put them in touch with the right people. But would any of our other panelists like to chip in, more things that we can do perhaps as well? Mark, from your point of view, what's on the to-do list?
Well, currently, Richard, we're currently looking at what COS has done on the wellbeing front and trying to expand that across the whole university. So we've got an awful lot to do on the wellbeing front. As David mentioned, we've got work to do, just making the general place more accessible for all. But I also think there's an onus to have on everyone to have a conversation about this, whether it's local conversation or sort of at an institutional level. I would start by local, and the reason for that is I went through, if I'm honest, the first 10 years pretending I didn't have epilepsy, trying to ignore it. And it's not until you come to grips with the fact that you've got it and you're able to talk about it that people can actually not necessarily understand, but appreciate the challenges that you have. So I would encourage colleagues, if there's only 4.8% registered and there's a lot more people out there affected, please register, please start talking about it openly, because until we all start talking about it openly, the institution won't get the momentum it needs, I think, to go forward at a pace.
I mean, related to this, we've got a comment in the chat from Billy. I think it's Billy, and I think it's. I mean, from my point of view, I'm very pleased we're moving more towards making sure that the campus is accessible for all, and that we're not taking special measures for particular people, but that it's integrated in design. And I think that's partly what you've been talking about, Dave. But Billy says, in regards to workplace adjustments are vital. For employers who don't have these strictly in place, does anyone have advice on how to implement these for disabled staff? Emma or Sonali, maybe this is one for you, as this is more in your area of research as well. Emma.
So in terms of individual adjustments, so you say that there's this, it's really great that there's kind of this universal access, but I think individual adjustments are really important. And that's what's coming up in the research as well. And from my own personal experiences, often an adjustment that kind of suits everybody or the majority may not suit you as an individual. So having these individual things in place can make a really big difference. So in terms of implementing them, again, just having conversations and trying to promote this culture that is accepting of adjustments. What I'm finding is people are trying to conceal their impairments, their disabilities, like you say, or perhaps they're trying to be in denial about them themselves. I know I've been in that position. Strong word, the word denial, but almost, if I deny this is an issue, it will just go away. That isn't the case. So being open as a workplace and being supportive. If there's senior managers that have got adjustments in place, perhaps getting people to come forward and in a very open way, whether it's through staff networks or workshops, talking about the type of support they've got at work, which may encourage other people to come forward. It obviously does depend what kind of organisation it is without knowing more from the question.
From an ESM point of view, we will look or will take to estates issues that will impact many people. So if, for instance, it's a corridor that needs automatic fire doors because you've got wheelchair users in the building, that's not going to just affect that one person, it will affect anybody who uses that building. So we will pick that up. Individual, there's two options. I mean, one, obviously discussions with line management, and the other option is to directly contact Access to Work, which I will come on to later anyway. But as individual employees, you can contact Access to Work. They now do some mental health support and can arrange reasonable adjustments and some funding and things like that. So it's really I'd recommend you go down that route. It's a government funded scheme. I use it. I use it better than 5 years to replace the equipment that I have, the camera equipment. So I would recommend you go down that route.
I'd just like to pick up on Richard's broader question as well about what can be done in the sector. It seems as a university we've taken much more of the focus on disability this year in terms of the equality scheme that's going to be rolling out. But in terms of the wider sector and how it can be more accessible, and indeed all places, it's important to recognise that they function as part of much wider political, economic and social landscapes. And there have been a lot of reforms, a lot of economic reforms that have been brought in place since the 80s that have had quite a bad impact, and under successive governments across various sectors and various communities, not least the disabled community. And it's been pointed out by a lot of academics, both disabled and non-disabled academics, that the way these reforms have been applied in the university sector can make environments increasingly exclusionary. Because these reforms can, in order they kind of dictate that in order to succeed, a worker needs to be a very specific type of person who can work in a very specific type of way within a very specific time frame. So in my mind, there's a question mark around, how are we making the systems and processes flexible enough to be able to incorporate more staff and, of course, more kinds of people. So as a university, I think we do have a role to play. We're an educational organisation, so I think we've got a role to play in educating staff, educating students, and the wider society about why accessibility and inclusion are so important. And I think we're well on the way to doing that, and I would welcome more conversations around it.
Sonali, please do. Yes.
I think that as a disabled academic, I think, physical access is important, but in terms of time and flexibility is also important, for publications, for REF. If we don't have time and energy to compete with your non-disabled colleagues and to put a publication in the right research bid, etc., you're disadvantaged because of your impairment. So I think that's very important. And also workplace flexibility in terms of, do you really need to do the admin? Can somebody, can you focus on your main job and not the admin side of things? So maybe somebody can pick up admin for you. That's kind of a reasonable adjustment. Can I also say another thing? Me and a colleague are working towards developing a research network on disability research across Birmingham University. And I think that'll be really good for, I'm out of breath, for disabled researchers also across the board, having an awareness of the importance of disability in academia, in research, teaching, and also the practical side of things as well. So Joe knows about this. And we had a big event 2 months ago, which was very successful. So hopefully we'll get more funding to develop it further.
So I think you've made two really important points there, Sonali, and I just wanted to pick up on both of them, if I may. The first is about the network of researchers of disability, and in particular, given that in the university, again, not wanting it all to be about COS, but in COS we have a disability and special educational needs department in our School of Education, with a number of researchers. Dave referred earlier to our visual impairment group, but also a world-leading group focused on research into autism and learning, and other specialisms in that group as well. So we really have some beacons of excellence, as well as researchers spread across the institution. And it's good today that we have two of those researchers from elsewhere in the university. So I'm very keen to see us develop that. Also, the point you made, Sonali, about reasonable adjustments, and reasonable adjustments being about time. If I think about how we deal with reasonable adjustments for our students, very often the first thing we reach to is to give them more time for their assessments. And I don't know if I could throw this back to you, Mark, but whether indeed you know, but how often it is that reasonable adjustments for staff orientate around time, and what the challenges are in responding to that particular kind of adjustment.
Well, Richard, I generally don't know, because I don't get involved in those things, but I know that Angela Breen has put something in the chat which says reasonable adjustments are recommended by myself, i.e. Angela Breen, Employee Disability Advisor. So I'm sure that's a question we could get answered, but I don't know whether we'd be able to answer it authoritatively in this forum, unless Angela is able to speak. Sorry, Richard.
I don't think she is, but let me read something that's come in on the Q&A, and I'd encourage others to engage with the Q&A, please, because we have time for more questions for the panel. But Lauren Thomas-Seal says, in terms of workplace adjustment, she's noticed that to get these implemented can often involve a huge amount of legwork undertaken by the person who needs them. For instance, car parking, office equipment, estate issues, even personal evacuation plans. And in terms of an academic career, this impacts the amount of time that the person has to do research, as well as the disability impacting the time and the career development. So do we need to shift emphasis towards the workplace to take a lead on this, as opposed to the person? Mark, do we need to shift more to the workplace to take a lead on this? Sorry to put you on the spot again.
Thanks, Richard, for that one. I think it's something that we certainly need to consider, and it's something that I'd draw in the experts, and perhaps we can take that offline, and I can speak to David with his Enabling Staff Network chair hat on, and draw in others across the university to take a view, because I generally don't know what kind of adjustments are made on an individual basis for everyone across the university, Richard. Sorry.
That's fine, Mark. You certainly can't know everything. I mean, continuing in the same vein, I wanted to ask the question another way around, and perhaps throw it open to some of the other panelists. And the question really is, what can managers do, and indeed what can any individual do, whether or not they have a disability, to promote a more kind of enabling environment for people with disabilities. Pete, I wonder if you'd like to have a go at that. What could all of us do from your point of view?
Sure. Well, firstly, shout out to my manager Sammy, who's been brilliant, incredibly flexible and understanding. And I also want to give a shout out to Dr. Nicole Brown from UCL. So she's recently published a book called Ableism in Academia with Dr. Jennifer Lee. That's available for free at the moment from the UCL Press. And Nicole gave an interview about that book recently, and she stressed the importance of individuals and managers having empathy. And that's empathy that we may not always be able to give 100%. And the ways in we work, the ways in which we work might be different from the norm. So it's about getting to know what the disability entails and finding ways to enable that person rather than disable them, because there's so much in the systems and structures that we operate under that creates incentives for managers to kind of marginalize or exclude disabled staff. And being mindful of that in the decision making. You know, are we the problem, or is the mindset or process you're following built in opposition to us being able to work at our best? So just to emphasize that on a personal note about empathy, for all the autistics in the room, one of the most important things I learned after diagnosis was the research around what's called the double empathy problem. And just very briefly, what this research is showing is that autistic people in general are better at interacting with other autistic people than non-autistic people. And non-autistic people are better at interacting with other non-autistic people rather than autistic people. So therefore, you know, the so-called social deficit that autistic people are that charge is kind of leveled at us all the time is not necessarily true, because the gap in understanding occurs on both sides. And that's something I would say for managers and individuals to keep in mind, so that, you know, just because they're in the majority doesn't necessarily mean they have a full understanding of the situation. And well, that takes us into issues of power, but that's for another conversation. So yeah, that's my thought.
Would anyone else on the panel like to come in on this question of you know, what can we all do? What can managers do?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I echo Mark's comments earlier. I think it's really important to talk about it. I think if somebody discloses a disability within your teams, have an in-depth conversation about what that actually means, what that person may need to be able to do the role. Quite often, in a lot of cases, and Peter's an example of this, and I suppose I am in some respects, that quite often a disability is diagnosed late and can be a traumatic shock for that individual, as well as if they haven't had the time to adjust to it. We get a lot of staff, I mean, it's who have age-related illness, who 1 minute are absolutely fine, next minute they're suddenly now in the disabled category. I've known several people on site that have actually completely, literally lost their sight overnight through absolutely, you know, just sort of illness. So I think that there's that, taking that account into it, which is also the mental health side as well. I don't know whether I've known of people with autism in the past, or have an escape mechanism. I don't know if Pete, you might be able to comment on this. At the point where they feel that they're getting overloaded, they might need to extract themselves from the situation. And if that's the case in a particular team, then that's the conversation that needs to happen, and find out what that mechanism needs to be. So I think those would be my views. And I think certainly the more open we are with each other about disability and the issues. And I would say, if you don't understand a disability, look it up, have a look on the internet, contact some people on site about it and find out more detail, because you might find, you know, that you can actually help more understanding the actual disability more than just sort of accepting as at face value.
Pete, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. So yeah, in terms of that escape mechanism, I mean, I usually those kind of things are employed for people that are on the verge of having a meltdown, and I'm quite lucky in the respect that I rarely do. So, you know, in those situations, if I can feel it coming on, you know, it's about having the manager being aware of that. So if you need to just leave, you can go, and also having somewhere that is quite clear that you can go to, where you can remove yourself from all that sensory stimulation. I think for a lot of autistic people, though, one of the other things aside from meltdown quite often is burnout, and that's where we've been so overstimulated for such a long time that we literally just can't function. You know, there are periods where I just can't even string a sentence together, you know. So I think having awareness of how the situation can impact on different people differently, because every single autistic person is different, every disabled person is different. And just having that conversation with your manager to know how best to manage it.
So I don't know if everyone can see the Q&A. If they can see this as much as I can, but Holly has put in the Q&A. So glad you mentioned that, David. I woke up one day in June and couldn't see properly in one eye anymore. And she talks about the adjustments that she's had for working at home, and hoping that will all work once she comes back to campus. And actually, I just wanted to share my own kind of personal first experience of disability, if you like. I went through much of my younger life not thinking that disability had much to do with me or my family, because I had no immediate experience of it. And my mother had exactly the same experience as Holly. She woke up one morning and she'd had a mini stroke and she could no longer see properly. She drove to the doctors and had her car keys taken away, and her life was transformed. And in seeing how she, as a registered blind person who had some sight but significant gaps in her sight, it was literally an eye opener for me, and helped me to see the world in a different way. And some of these things, they can be age related. They are things that can actually happen to anybody. We have some questions coming in now on the Q&A, so let me go to those. One is from Neetha Joy, who has a two-part question. She wants to know from the panelists whether their disabilities had any impact on their choice of career that they've made. I think one or two panelists have already said that is indeed the case, but also whether whom do they consider their support systems that they've relied on throughout their lives, and have these support systems changed over time? And is the support available at the workplace? Sonali, you're nodding vigorously. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your support systems?
My support systems are primarily familial and personal. They were always my family and my father, obviously, as CP is from birth, so I was always known as having an impairment and disabled, but I was never treated any differently. I was always, my parents had quite high expectations of me. My parents are medics, and so in a way they kind of pushed me more, because I guess they were aware that I'd be disadvantaged by society along the way, and made me stronger and more resilient in myself. So I guess throughout my career, it's been my parents, mum and dad. For him, in terms of academic support, I guess my biggest academic support is my colleague in Leeds, who was my boss for my Nuffield Fellowship. And this was in 2001. I met him in Washington, DC at the conference, and he's been supportive ever since, and understanding disability, but also understanding what you need to get ahead in academia.
Mark, you'd like to say something about your support systems?
Yeah, it's both support systems and career choice, really. In terms of support systems, I rely heavily on my wife. She's absolutely fantastic. As it turned out, her brother had epilepsy growing up, which is now controlled, and she just knows exactly how to treat me, exactly when to ignore me, which can be quite often, actually. But yeah, she's fantastic. And in terms of career, of course not. Why on earth wouldn't anyone want to be an engineer? It's a fantastic job.
Emma, did you want to come in on this? The support systems, people have talked about family support systems. Are there also support systems that people look to at work that maybe that you have or that you've seen in your research?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a real heavy reliance on colleagues and informal support. So a real kind of move away from the formal reasonable adjustments, the policies, the things we've spoken about today. People actually are relying more often than not on colleagues and the goodwill, for a borrowed phrase, of their colleagues and their peers to help them, to support and to understand. So very much kind of on the ground, people are supporting other disabled people at work. Obviously with the pandemic, working from home, that has flagged up a few issues, and people have actually had to almost come out as disabled as a result of this, because those colleagues and peers have been taken away. They're not in their living room working with them anymore. So more support has had to be put into place to replace the colleagues and the informal support. Myself personally, I've actually got an assistance dog, a big yellow Labrador that helps me. If I was to fall, she would fetch my phone. She alerts me if I have dizzy spells. So that's really interesting, bringing her onto campus. Obviously haven't been on for a while, but that automatically makes me very overtly disabled. If you take my dog away, as I say, you perhaps wouldn't know, but that really does change the dynamics of working on campus. People want to talk, they want to find out why you've got the dog, and people are genuinely really quite interested in that non-human support system.
I think I'd echo that. I think I have really a couple of three support mechanisms. I mean, the biggest one is my wife, who does cricket event for me in the home life. For me to go to a supermarket is nearly impossible. I can't see the goods on the shelves or that sort of thing. You send me for a tin of beans, I'll probably come back with tomatoes. But the other support mechanism I have is the people I work with, because if there's something I can't see, or they'll just tell me what it is, they'll do it. I mean, recently I had to go down to, well, January I went on to a conference, and I went down with a colleague who was great, did all the navigation for me, basically got us there, got us back. So it's that type of mechanism. And the other one for me now is a white cane. I have to use a cane in traffic. I can't see the cars coming anymore. If they're coming, because I'm blind in the central vision. So if I'm looking at something, I can't see it. If it's in the side of me, then I'm looking at it, if you can follow that. So I think there's that it is very much a combination of different support mechanisms that's sort of there, and family as well.
Thanks, Dave. Going back to the questions, Kathleen Barnes has been in conversation with you, Pete, over the chat about something you said earlier, but she's also put in the Q&A that in preparation for a doctoral education conference at the end of this month, she emailed 3 people in the department to ask if a changing places facility was available in the building or on campus, but only one person replied, and they didn't understand what a changing places is. They questioned if she meant a shower or a baby changing facility. That she was shocked that after years of campaigning for changing places, that people in the Department of Education were unaware. Are we surprised? Anyone on the panel to take that?
There are some changing places on campus. I can't tell you where they are off the top of my head, but the person really to contact about that is Hilary Tansley, who's the accessibility officer for estates, and she should have the information about all that.
Emma, are you surprised from your work?
I think it highlights this real gap and problem that we've got all these disability initiatives, we've got disability confident, all these wonderful formalised policies and procedures, but they're very much kept at the top. So the person responding to this email may not know about these things that are in place. So for me, it demonstrates this need to disseminate information and get more awareness out there about disability, and support and adjustments and things that are happening across the board. Let's get them out of the equality and diversity offices and get them on the ground. Let's really try and raise the awareness of these policies and procedures.
Mark.
Yeah, and it comes back to a point I made earlier about talking. I think people often think they don't have the vocabulary to have the conversation without basically upsetting or insulting people. And I think the more we start to talk about it, the more everyone will realise actually it's okay to talk about it.
So perhaps that also leads into another question I've got here from an anonymous attendee. Is there a plan to have a person who is an ambassador or an intranet page that acts as a roadmap outlining all the elements that go into making the university experience and work experience accessible for students and staff? Mark, is there a plan to have an intranet page?
Well, I would just also like to pick up one of the comments that have been made in the chat, actually, Peter, around the excellent work that Joe has been doing on many areas relating to this. In terms of an intranet page, again, it's something that I can pick up with David in the first instance and other colleagues to find out whether that would be of use for a lot of people. The problem with internet pages, of course, is they need to be kept up to date.
That is a problem. And in terms of ambassador, I mean, I think that in some respects I am supposed to be such an ambassador, at least within UEB, for making sure that issues to do with accessibility, making the campus and indeed our university more broadly open and inclusive, that these are being raised at UEB. And I think if anybody in this meeting feels there is something that I can advocate for on your behalf, I'm more than happy to try to engage with that. Although, as somebody has put in the chat, Joe is also playing a fantastic role in that respect. More questions. So Joe Smart says, if not an intranet page, where should be the first port of call for a UOB staff member who finds themselves suddenly disabled?
So I think the first port of call for the vast majority of things will be the line manager. Line managers have a tremendous amount of flexibility. An empathetic line manager can help. If you don't get anywhere with your line manager, there are other routes, because obviously line managers vary. There's the HR business partner, and again, I would like to flag the excellent work that Joe Dubley has been doing in this area. So there's lots of routes to try and seek help. But I would first, personally, if it was me, go with the line manager.
So Joe has added in, and what if I'm the line manager? Bearing in mind that I am a line manager, I might well find that I am not being given any extra resource to deal with the problem or the adjustment, the issue that is in front of me.
So one of the benefits about being at this place is we all have line managers. Even line managers have line managers, and also the HR business partners within the college or the relevant area actually are very knowledgeable and very, very helpful. So that's where I would go.
So there is also something in the Q&A from Dean about disabled people's support groups, networks and helplines. I don't know if anybody wants to mention any of those external resources that they've found particularly useful in their area. Pete, you were nodding. Why don't you take this?
I think some of this comes back to the earlier question around support networks, and by far the most helpful thing for me has been peer support. So connecting with other autistic individuals has been an absolute lifesaver for me. You know, see, there's a couple of them in the audience right now, so hello. But that has absolutely been the best thing for me. I mean, as I said before, we're in a situation now where public services funding has been reduced very significantly. And in a lot of cases, we're having to find our own support and our own networks. So if there you know, if there are societies available, like the National Autistic Society is a good one. There are some good ones locally, like Autism West Midlands and things like that, from an autistic perspective. But you know, I would say for any disability, reach out for people that have experienced similar things to you, because that's where the good support is.
Would anyone else like to point to some really helpful sources of support or advice? Sonali?
For disabled academics, I can really vouch for Leeds University Centre for Disability Studies as a Centre for Excellence, and I did my postdoc there. It is very supportive and very understanding of disabled staff, especially academic staff.
Okay, thank you. Time is running on, and there are no open questions in the Q&A now, so I think it might be time for me to ask a concluding question to all of the panelists. This is one I've not prepared you for, but it's a question of the moment. We're doing this by Zoom, and I've had at least one person with a disability say to me that she is desperate to continue with how we are doing things at the moment, because she likes Zoom so much compared with what went before, and picking out things like the fact that on a Zoom call you can see everybody's faces really straightforwardly, and you can see their names next to their faces, and how helpful she's found that with her particular disability in terms of working with colleagues. So my question to you is, as we hopefully move to the end of, you know, at least maybe past the middle of this terrible pandemic that has had so many negative consequences for us, if there was one thing that you could pick up from what we've been able to do over the last 6 months as a result of the adoption of technology that we've been through, what would that be, and how would we consolidate that as a gain from this time? I don't have any particular order I want to take you in, but Pete, you look like you want to go first, so over to you.
Well, just to say that the person you just described, I absolutely relate to what they're saying. Zoom has been an absolute godsend for me, and I think we've made a lot of progress technologically in a very short period of time through the pandemic, and it would be a shame to lose some of that. So some of the working practices that we've adopted, you know, the kind of flexible working, not always having to be in the office if we don't feel able to be there, has been absolutely wonderful for me. You know, I appreciate on the other side of that, a lot of people experience what they're calling Zoom fatigue, you know, kind of overdoing it on online platforms. But for a lot of other people, the Zoom fatigue occurs in real life, you know. So yeah, I think just having that blended mode has been wonderful.
Who else would like to come in on this? Sonali, you look like you've unmuted. Do you want to say something?
Yeah. Actually, since we've been in lockdown, I guess in March, my research has become really productive. I mean, I know a lot of studies had to be mute, stopped, or paused because of the pandemic. But in terms of my research, I've done all my field work on Zoom or Skype. I've developed an educational resource on Zoom. And we've done the SRC workshops on Zoom with an international audience. So actually, work has been really productive because of this technology.
Who'd like to comment next? Dave, I think you're unmuted. Do you want to have a go at this?
I think Zoom definitely has made a difference. I also think that Microsoft Teams being rolled out has made a massive difference as well. We've well, you're on about support networks. Obviously, enabling staff network is a support network, and we've set up a Teams site now, which members of the group can use that if they wish to communicate, talk about disability. I think that has been a massive move forward. For me, I don't recognise people in meeting rooms until I hear them speak. I haven't got a clue who they are. If they're more than about 2 or 3 feet away from me, I just can't make it. You know, they're just a blur. So I think I echo the point that this format of being able to see everybody, communicate, even as far as presentation, somebody shares a screen, I can see it now. I can zoom. I have assistive tech on the computer anyway, so I can zoom the actual presentation if you follow. Whereas if I were to go into a lecture theatre, the presentation on screen, I have to take a pair of binoculars or a telescope or some sort of magnification equipment with me to be able to take part in that, unless it's provided ahead of the time, which used to happen. I could request it ahead of time, so presentations, but it's a lot easier to follow. I think one of the things I'd like to see going forward is certainly this technology being used. An ideal situation would be a student able to take a laptop into a teaching room and take part and see the presentation that's up on the screen actually on the laptop in front of them. I know we're going down that road. I think from a learning point of view, that is very good. A lot of the reasonable adjustments I've put in place or helping students put in place has been very similar situations to that in the past pre-COVID. So I think, the technology moving on and the fast speed that we're adopting to it. The other thing that I think going forward is a lot of committees, I think, are going to maintain their communication over Zoom rather than face-to-face. The enabling staff network will probably continue more over Zoom because we're getting more people attend the meetings, because they're not having to travel across campus, and for us to actually find a properly accessible room on campus is quite difficult because they're all pre-booked for teaching events have already been allocated to accommodate students with disability issues. So for us to get an ad hoc room where we can get 20, 30 people together, some wheelchair users, some not, this is a perfect platform for that to replace it.
Thanks. Emma, what would you like to take away from this period?
I would echo the same. The digital technology, I've had participants say to me that it has leveled the playing field for them. They feel able to contribute and be included in a way that they haven't before. For example, they can lie down and physically stretch their body out, but still contribute to a Zoom meeting, which has been really good. There's also quite a lot of unrest and frustration that a lot of people have been fighting for reasonable adjustments and flexible working for years. And then almost overnight, the whole nation had this adjustment put in place. But actually, disabled people have been fighting for these adjustments for a long time and haven't been able to get them. But when the rest of the population needs it, that got rolled forward. So whilst it is a good thing, there's still quite a lot of frustration and unrest that this hasn't been enacted sooner and being supported in this way.
That's something I completely understand. Mark, over to you for the final word. I didn't design it this way, but what would you take forward into the next period?
You know, Richard, it's a really interesting question because David and I were just discussing this at the start of the week. You and I, Richard, were discussing it also at the start of the week. I can see the benefits of Zoom. I'm rubbish with names, so having people's names right next to their face is absolutely fantastic. But I can also see the disadvantages. I'm currently on campus because I was teaching this morning, and it was great to get in front of a class and actually teach, not properly, but have people in the same room. So rather than answer the question, Richard, I think I'll put a question back to you, because you said, what can you do? We should let you know if there's anything you can do to help. Well, I would encourage you to keep this conversation live at UEB to, when we move forward, how can we have the best of both worlds?
That is an entirely fair challenge, Mark, and it's a good place to end. I can commit to keeping that pressure up. There are more things coming in on the chat now that I'm struggling to digest as I wind up. I think I do need to, we're 5 minutes to the hour, so I do need to draw to a close, but I want to thank all of our panelists, Emma, Pete, Dave, Sonali and Mark, for a really interesting discussion. I can see lots of comments have come up in the Q&A and on the chat that people have valued this discussion. I'd also like to say a big thanks to Sammy and to Joe for setting this up. I've seen comments before as well about how good it is that we are doing such a set of events for Disability History Month. So thank you, Sammy and Joe, just bringing your screens back on. And I hope that we can keep this conversation going over the next few months and indeed beyond. So thank you all, and we'll call it a day there.